Ambassador Clethvar stepped off the Zirak diplomatic ship, his long, scaled tail flicking behind him. The air on Earth was warmer than expected, pressing against his cold-blooded body like an invisible force. His species, the Zirak, came from a planet with controlled temperatures. Never too hot, never too cold. Everything about Earth already felt uncomfortable. Yet, as he observed the humans waiting to greet him, they didn't seem to mind the strange, shifting climate at all. Some wore thin clothing, others had heavy coats, as if they could choose their own level of comfort. It was unsettling. The human delegation stood in a straight line, their leader stepping forward. "Welcome to Earth, Ambassador Clethvar," said Captain Lewis, a tall human with sharp eyes and a confident posture. He smiled, revealing his teeth, a predator's display. Clethvar's muscles tensed instinctively. Among Zirak, showing teeth was a sign of aggression. Was this a threat? Before he could react, the other humans also showed their teeth. Were they all hostile? No. Their body language suggested something else. Happiness. Friendliness. Clethvar hesitated but gave a slow nod. "Greetings, Captain Lewis. I appreciate your hospitality." The humans led him inside a large building made of steel and glass. It felt unnatural to him. His people preferred stone and underground dwellings. But what disturbed him more was the temperature inside. It was warm, too warm. Zirak preferred cooler environments. Heat made them sluggish, drained their energy. Yet humans, they walked around as if it was nothing. Clethvar flexed his claws slightly, trying to focus. He was here for diplomacy, not to be distracted by human oddities. "We have prepared a formal dinner to honor your arrival," Captain Lewis said, leading him to a grand dining hall. The table was covered with steaming dishes, each plate releasing heat into the air. Clethvar stared in horror. Why was everything burning? A human placed a cup of dark liquid in front of him. Steam curled from it, hot and threatening. "This is coffee," said a human named Dr. Patel, smiling. "It helps us stay awake and alert." Clethvar's eye ridges lifted. A boiling liquid for alertness. That made no sense. Heat was dangerous. No Zirak would ever drink something that could burn them. But before he could protest, Captain Lewis lifted his own cup and took a sip without hesitation. Clethvar tensed, expecting the human to scream in pain. Instead, Lewis sighed and smiled. "Ah, that's good." "Good? How?" Another human, a woman named Sarah, picked up a red round object from her plate. She bit into it and immediately turned red. "I'm burning up," she gasped, waving a hand in front of her mouth. Clethvar's claws gripped the table. Had she just been poisoned? The humans around her laughed. Sarah grabbed a glass of water, gulped it down, and took another bite of the burning food. The ambassador froze in horror. This wasn't an accident. She was choosing to eat something that burned her. His mind raced. Did humans enjoy pain? The Zirak had strict rules. Avoid heat, avoid pain, avoid anything dangerous. It was the key to their survival. But these creatures, they welcomed danger. He turned to Captain Lewis, his voice careful. "This food, it burns, does it not?" Lewis chuckled. "Oh yeah, that's spicy food. It's got capsaicin. It tricks the nerves into thinking it's hot. But don't worry, it's not real heat." Not real heat. The woman was sweating. Her face was red. She had literally shouted, "I'm burning up." And yet, she kept eating. Clethvar's tail twitched. "And you enjoy this?" Sarah grinned. "Oh, absolutely." Madness. Absolute madness. Zirak avoided discomfort at all costs. It was a basic survival instinct. But humans, they actively sought it out. Clethvar sat back in his chair, mind spinning. If humans willingly burned themselves, what else were they capable of? For the first time in his career, he wasn't sure if his species should fear the humans or admire them. Ambassador Clethvar sat stiffly in his chair, his scaled fingers tapping against the polished wooden table. The humans around him continued their meal, laughing and eating as if nothing strange was happening. But Clethvar couldn't relax. He kept glancing at the spicy food, the red, burning substance that made the human woman cry out, "I'm burning up." Yet she had continued eating it. It made no sense. Humans were fragile creatures, their bodies covered in soft flesh instead of protective scales. Yet they willingly put themselves through pain. Clethvar's tail curled slightly in discomfort. His people, the Zirak, avoided anything that could cause harm. Heat was dangerous. Spicy food was poisonous. Pain was a warning to stop. But these humans, they seemed to enjoy suffering. Captain Lewis noticed the ambassador's hesitation and smiled, showing his predator-like teeth again. Not a fan of spicy food, huh? Clethvar's throat clicked as he tried to find the right words. "I do not understand. Your companion just claimed she was burning, yet she continues to consume the food." His golden eyes narrowed. Do humans enjoy pain? The humans at the table paused for a second, then they burst into laughter. Clethvar's tail flicked in annoyance. He was serious. Lewis wiped a tear from his eye. No, it's not that we like pain. It's more. We get used to it." Clethvar blinked. Get used to it. Sarah, the woman who had been eating the spicy food, leaned forward. "Yeah, the first time I ate something this spicy, I thought my mouth was going to melt. But over time, my body adapted. Now, I can handle even hotter food." She grinned. "And I enjoy it." The ambassador's claws pressed lightly into the table. Adapted. Zirak bodies didn't work that way. If something hurt them, they avoided it forever. Their survival depended on avoiding discomfort, not facing it again and again. "Your species is unusual," Clethvar finally said, his voice low. Lewis grinned. "Oh, that's just the beginning." Clethvar wasn't sure he liked the sound of that. Strange human behaviors. After dinner, Lewis led Clethvar on a brief tour of the human facility. It was an impressive structure, filled with technology and efficient design. But as they walked, the ambassador noticed more strange human behaviors. At one point, they passed a large metallic room filled with steam. A group of humans sat inside, sweating. Clethvar stared in horror. Are they being punished? Lewis followed his gaze and laughed. That's a sauna. People sit inside because it helps them relax. Relax. In unbearable heat, Clethvar's scales bristled. The Zirak avoided heat at all costs. A sauna was a torture chamber to them. Yet these humans, they willingly walked inside. Lewis shrugged. The heat makes our bodies stronger. It improves blood flow, helps with stress. Clethvar's mind struggled to process this information. His people hid from the heat, but humans used it to grow stronger. And it didn't stop there. Later, Clethvar saw a group of humans running outside, their faces red and covered in sweat. Are they fleeing something? He asked. Nope, just exercising, Lewis said casually. Clethvar's tail twitched. Why would anyone run without need? To stay fit, Lewis explained. Our bodies get stronger the more we push them. Clethvar was stunned. The Zirak only ran when escaping danger. But humans? They ran on purpose. They chose to exhaust themselves. For the first time in his life, Clethvar felt uncertain. Were humans mad? Or were they stronger than he had ever imagined? The cold test. That night, Clethvar sat in his private chamber, deep in thought. Humans could handle heat. They could endure pain. They could push their bodies to the limit. But what about cold? Zirak thrived in cold environments. Heat weakened them, but cold made them sharp and alert. Maybe this was the human's weakness. The next day, during the next meeting, Clethvar decided to test his theory. He secretly lowered the room's temperature, making it colder and colder. To his shock, the humans barely reacted. Some of them put on jackets, others simply drank hot coffee, but none of them complained. Captain Lewis noticed Clethvar watching him and smirked. "Trying to freeze us out, Ambassador." Clethvar felt a rare moment of fear. If heat didn't break them, and cold didn't bother them, what could possibly stop humans? Ambassador Clethvar sat in stunned silence, his golden eyes scanning the human delegates. The temperature in the meeting room had dropped far below what was considered normal for their species, yet none of them seemed to care. Some had simply put on jackets, while others sipped steaming beverages like it as just another day. Captain Lewis, however, remained exactly as he was, calm, confident, and completely unaffected. Clethvar's tail curled as a deep, unsettling thought took root in his mind. Are humans immune to suffering? For the Zirak, comfort was survival. Heat drained them. Cold froze them. Pain was a signal to stop immediately. But humans, they endured it all. He leaned forward, his claws tapping against the sleek metal table. "Your kind confuses me, Captain Lewis." The human chuckled. "Oh, we get that a lot." Clethvar narrowed his eyes. "You withstand heat, yet you bathe in it. You endure the cold, yet you drink warm liquids as if to challenge it." His voice lowered. "Why?" Lewis exhaled and set his coffee cup down. "Because it makes us stronger." The ambassador's tail twitched. "Explain." Lewis folded his arms. "We weren't born the toughest species, Ambassador. No claws, no thick scales, no built-in weapons. But we learned something early on. If we keep pushing, we get stronger." He gestured toward the steaming coffee. "Spicy food. It hurts, yeah, but the more we eat it, the more we can handle. Cold. It stings at first, but if we expose ourselves to it enough, our bodies learn to fight back. Same with heat, pain, exhaustion." Clethvar remained silent, absorbing the information. Sarah, the woman who had eaten the burning food earlier, grinned. "Pain isn't always bad, Ambassador. It's a lesson. It tells us where our limits are. And then, if we want to, we can break past those limits." The Zirak ambassador's mind whirled. His people had always treated pain as a warning. They avoided it at all costs. But humans treated pain like a tool. Clethvar suddenly felt small in comparison. His species had spent centuries avoiding discomfort, while humans had spent centuries embracing it and growing stronger. Perhaps that is why they are so powerful. Fire and fury. Just as the conversation settled, a loud alarm blared through the facility. The lights flickered red, and a human officer rushed in, his face tense. "Emergency in engineering. A plasma conduit overheated. There's a fire spreading through the lower decks." Clethvar stiffened in horror. Fire. That was a death sentence for Zirak. Their cold-blooded bodies were weak against extreme heat. If a Zirak ship caught fire, the crew would immediately evacuate. It was the only logical option. He turned to Captain Lewis, expecting the same response. But instead, the human stood up calmly and nodded. "All right, we'll handle it. Handle it." Before Clethvar could ask what that meant, Lewis and the other humans rushed toward the danger. Clethvar hesitated. No sane Zirak would run toward a fire. But if he wanted to understand these strange creatures, he needed to see this with his own eyes. He followed them. The unbreakable will of humans. When Clethvar arrived at the lower decks, he was staggered by what he saw. Flames roared through the corridor, heat rolling off the walls in waves. Zirak physiology shrank from such temperatures. Even standing far away, he could feel his energy draining. But the humans charged straight into the fire. They wore protective suits, but that wasn't what shocked him. What shocked him was their attitude. They weren't afraid. They weren't panicking. They were fighting. One team of humans sprayed foam onto the flames, cutting off its air supply. Others worked together, carrying injured crew members to safety. Even those without protective suits stayed behind to help in any way they could. Clethvar was speechless. If this were a Zirak vessel, the crew would have abandoned ship immediately. But humans? They refused to run. Even when faced with something as deadly as fire, they fought back. They refused to surrender. The fire is nothing compared to them. Clethvar's body trembled as he watched the humans battle the flames. One human, a young officer, was burned when an explosion burst from a nearby conduit. He fell, clutching his arm. Clethvar winced. Surely the human would stop now. But the officer gritted his teeth, stood up, and kept fighting. Clethvar's heart pounded. How could a species be so resilient? Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the fire was defeated. The engineering team cheered as the last of the flames died out. The air smelled of smoke and melted metal, but the crisis was over. Captain Lewis walked over, removing his helmet. His face was streaked with soot, his uniform slightly burned, but he was smiling. "No big deal," he said, voice casual. "We've dealt with worse." Clethvar could only stare at him. In the face of destruction, these humans had stood firm. They did not flee. They did not surrender. They did not break. For the first time, Clethvar truly understood why humans were feared across the galaxy. It wasn't just their technology. It wasn't just their intelligence. It was their willpower. They could walk through fire and death and come out stronger. Ambassador Clethvar stood in stunned silence as the smoke still curled through the corridors. The fire was gone, but the image of humans charging into the flames without hesitation was burned into his mind. If this were a Zirek ship, the crew would have fled instantly. There was no honor in facing certain death. But humans, they had run toward it. They had fought the fire as if it were an enemy. And they had won. Captain Lewis wiped soot from his face and patted one of his injured crew members on the back. "Good work, folks. Get some rest. We'll run diagnostics in an hour." Clethvar's eyes widened. "You are not stopping." Lewis turned to him with a raised eyebrow. "Why would we stop?" The ambassador struggled for words. "You just survived a crisis. Your bodies must be weak. Your minds must be fatigued." His golden eyes narrowed. "Yet you push forward." Lewis shrugged. "That's what we do." The Zirek diplomat could not comprehend it. Pain was a warning. Danger was a signal to retreat. Why did humans refuse to acknowledge their limits? His mind raced as he observed the humans closely. Some were bandaging their wounds while joking with each other. Others were reviewing data from the damaged systems, making adjustments as if this were nothing but a minor inconvenience. A young human, the officer who had suffered burns earlier, walked by. His arm was wrapped in a protective covering, but he still smiled as he gave a respectful nod to his captain. Clethvar's tail twitched in disbelief. "You were injured," he said. The officer grinned. "Yeah, got a little too close to the explosion." "Should you not be resting?" "I will," the officer said, stretching his arm slightly, testing the movement. "But there's still work to do." Madness. Utter madness. Clethvar could not look away. His people avoided harm at all costs, yet these humans treated injuries as inconveniences, not threats. He turned to Lewis again. "You disregard pain." Lewis shook his head. "No, we don't. We just don't let it stop us." The ambassador's claws flexed lightly against the smooth metal of his seat. That single sentence carried a weight he had never encountered before. Pain was a message, a warning, a demand to stop. Yet humans chose to ignore it. How? Why? Humans seek out suffering. Later that day, Clethvar sat in a lounge, still trying to make sense of what he had witnessed. A few human officers relaxed nearby, talking about something called a training session. "What is training?" he finally asked, curiosity overtaking him. A young officer named Davis turned to him. "It's how we get better. We practice different skills so that we can handle real situations better." Clethvar tilted his head. "So you rehearse for battle?" Davis chuckled. "More than just battle. We train our bodies too. Running, lifting, pushing ourselves to the limit. The ambassador stiffened, on purpose. Of course, Davis said, stretching his arms. You never know what challenge you'll face next. If you don't train, you won't be ready. Clethfar's mind reeled. Humans didn't just endure pain, they actively sought it out to prepare themselves. A realization hit him. That's why they didn't fear the fire. That's why they didn't fear exhaustion. They had already pushed their bodies beyond those limits many times before. Clethfar exhaled slowly, feeling an unfamiliar sense of unease. His people had always assumed their species was superior, stronger, faster, more efficient. Yet, compared to humans, they seemed fragile. The Zirak avoided suffering. Humans embraced it, and that made them dangerous, pushing beyond limits. Lewis entered the lounge, a fresh cup of coffee in hand. He sat across from Clethfar, giving him a knowing look. You look like a guy who's got a lot of questions. The ambassador met his gaze. Your people, you do not know when to stop. Lewis grinned. That's the idea. Clethfar's claws tapped against the table. But pain is meant to be avoided. It is a survival instinct. Lewis took a slow sip of coffee before answering. Pain is also a teacher. Clethfar leaned forward. Explain. Lewis set his cup down. If you stop the moment something gets hard, you never grow. You never learn. Humans have survived because we push through discomfort. If we stopped every time something was painful, we would have died out a long time ago. Clethfar absorbed the words carefully. This was the key. This was what made humans so unstoppable. It wasn't just their technology. It wasn't just their intelligence. It was their refusal to quit. Pain didn't break them. Discomfort didn't weaken them. It made them stronger. Clethfar let out a slow breath. Perhaps his people had been wrong about humans. Perhaps they weren't just another species in the galaxy. Perhaps they were something far greater. Ambassador Clethfar sat alone in his quarters, his golden eyes staring at the reflection in the glass window. Beyond it, the vast emptiness of space stretched infinitely, cold and silent. But his mind was anything but silent. His thoughts raced, filled with images of humans running into fire, of wounded officers refusing to rest, of humans deliberately seeking out discomfort in training. The Zirak had always believed they were superior in endurance and survival. Their cold-blooded bodies required less energy, their natural armor made them resistant to many threats, and they avoided unnecessary risks. That was the logical way to survive. But the humans had defied every expectation. They did not avoid suffering. They did not fear pain. They thrived in it. Are you not afraid? His thoughts were interrupted by a soft chime at his door. The panel slid open, revealing Captain Lewis, standing there with his usual relaxed expression. Mind if I join you? Clethfar gestured for him to enter. Lewis stepped inside and leaned against the table, his eyes scanning the ambassador's troubled face. You've been thinking a lot, Lewis noted. Clethfar's tail twitched. Your species is unlike any I have encountered before. Lewis smirked. I get that a lot. The ambassador leaned forward. Are you not afraid? The question hung in the air. Lewis tilted his head. Afraid of what? Pain, death, suffering. Clethfar's golden eyes narrowed. You humans throw yourselves into danger, push yourselves beyond your limits, even when it is unnecessary. Why? Lewis was silent for a moment, then exhaled slowly. We are afraid, Ambassador, but we don't let fear control us. Clethfar studied him carefully. Lewis continued, fear is natural. It keeps us alive. But if we let fear stop us, we would never accomplish anything. That's why we push through it. Clethfar's claws tapped lightly against the table. This concept was so foreign to him. The Zirak avoided danger because they feared it. But humans, they felt fear, but acted anyway. Is that why they are so powerful? A weakness that is not weakness. A voice crackled over the communicator. "Captain, we've got a minor issue in the training bay. One of the recruits overexerted themselves." Lewis sighed and tapped his earpiece. "I'll be right there." Clethfar frowned. "One of your crew members collapsed." "Yeah," Lewis said casually. "Happens all the time." The ambassador stiffened. "That is not normal." Lewis chuckled. "For us, it is." Curious, Clethfar followed the captain to the training bay. When they arrived, they saw a young human officer sitting on a bench, drenched in sweat. A medic was handing him water, checking his vitals. Clethfar's tail flicked. "He has harmed himself." The recruit shook his head weakly. "I just pushed too hard. I'll be fine." Clethfar turned to Lewis. "You allow this?" Lewis crossed his arms. "We don't encourage people to hurt themselves, but pushing past limits is how we grow." The Zirak ambassador could not believe what he was hearing. His people would never allow such a thing. Exhaustion was failure. Injury was a sign of weakness. Yet here was a young human who had driven himself to exhaustion voluntarily, and instead of being punished or shamed, he was being treated with respect. Clethfar exhaled. "Your species does not fear weakness." Lewis's eyes twinkled. "No, we accept it, and then we overcome it." The word struck Clethfar like a lightning bolt. A species that refuses to break. Later that night, Clethfar stood by the observation deck, staring at the stars. His claws rested lightly on the cool metal railing. Humans were fragile. They broke easily. They suffered from sickness, from injury, from exhaustion. And yet, they were the most unbreakable species he had ever seen. Because even when they were pushed down, they got back up. Even when their bodies failed, their will did not. And that was true strength. Clethfar realized something in that moment. The Zirak had always measured strength in physical endurance, in natural defenses, in biological superiority. But humans measured strength in something far greater. In their refusal to quit. A shiver ran through the ambassador's body. This is why they are feared. This is why they are respected. This is why no empire in the galaxy has ever truly conquered them. Because humans did not just endure suffering. They conquered it. Ambassador Clethfar could not sleep. For hours, he had been turning over the same thoughts in his mind, trying to understand what he had witnessed. The strength of humans was not in their bodies, but in their will. They faced pain, exhaustion, and fear, not with avoidance, but with determination. It was unnatural. It was terrifying. And yet, it was also admirable. His people, the Zirak, had always believed in efficiency, self-preservation, and caution. Strength was measured in survival. Pain was a warning. Weakness was failure. But humans, they saw pain as a challenge. They saw weakness as something to overcome. Clethfar had always assumed his species was superior. Now, he wasn't so sure. "You call that suffering?" The next morning, Clethfar walked through the corridors of the human ship, still deep in thought. The air smelled of metal, machinery, and something burnt. He followed the scent and found himself in the training bay. Inside, a group of humans were doing something bizarre. They were lifting heavy objects, running at high speeds, and stretching their bodies in unnatural ways. Some of them groaned in pain, their faces twisted in discomfort. Clethfar's tail flicked. "Why are you hurting yourselves?" One of the humans, a young officer named Reed, grinned despite the sweat dripping down his forehead. "We're training. You are in pain." "Yeah," Reed admitted, breathing hard. "But that's how we get stronger." Clethfar narrowed his golden eyes. "Pain is a sign of damage. Why would you choose to suffer?" Reed chuckled and picked up a heavier weight, his muscles shaking from the strain. "Because if we don't challenge ourselves, we'll stay weak. And weakness isn't an option." Clethfar could not believe what he was hearing. The Zirak spent centuries perfecting ways to avoid discomfort, to minimize struggle. Yet here were humans, deliberately pushing themselves to the edge of their limits, and then going even further. A female officer next to Reed wiped sweat from her brow. Besides, she said, grinning, this isn't even real suffering. Clethfar turned to her. What do you mean? Reed smirked. Suffering is when you have no choice. This is just practice. Clethfar felt a chill run through his body. Humans prepared for suffering. They trained for hardship. And that meant, when true suffering arrived, when war, disaster, or crisis struck, they were ready for it. The fire that never dies. Later that day, Clethfar stood on the bridge, observing Captain Lewis. The human captain was reviewing reports, strategizing with his officers, handling 3 different conversations at once. He looked exhausted, but his eyes remained sharp, his posture firm, his focus unwavering. Clethfar approached. Captain, you look unwell. Lewis smiled tiredly. I'll sleep later. Too much to do right now. The ambassador frowned. Should you not rest? Lewis chuckled. Maybe, but there's still work to be done. Clethfar studied him carefully. Does your kind ever stop? Lewis leaned back in his chair, thinking for a moment. Then with a small smirk, he said, No, we don't. Clethfar felt something shift inside him. The humans did not stop. They did not retreat. They did not surrender. Even when exhausted, even when injured, even when outnumbered and outmatched, they kept going. It was not just stubbornness. It was something more than that. It was willpower, a fire that never died. And suddenly, Clethfar understood why they win. The Zirak had always feared humans, not because of their weapons, not because of their numbers, but because of something far more dangerous. Because humans did not just fight when they were strong. They fought when they were weak. They fought when they were tired. They fought when they were bleeding, exhausted, and broken. And they still won. Clethfar's claws flexed against the cold metal of the railing. If the Zirak ever went to war against the humans, they would be at a disadvantage from the very beginning. Because the Zirak would fight until it became too painful to continue. But humans would fight until they won. And that made them the most dangerous species in the galaxy. Ambassador Clethfar had spent his life studying other species. He had seen creatures that could survive in the vacuum of space, beings with minds so advanced they could predict the future, and warriors who could crush steel with their bare hands. Yet none of them frightened him the way humans did. Not because of their weapons, not because of their technology, but because of their spirit. They refused to break. They refused to surrender. And now, as he stood on the bridge of the human ship, he was about to witness it one last time. The crisis. A sudden alarm blared through the ship. Red warning lights flashed across the control panels. Status report. Captain Lewis barked. An officer turned, face tense. We've got an incoming energy surge. It's an unidentified weapon. If it hits, our shields won't hold. Clethfar's scales tightened in alarm. Then retreat. Move out of range. Lewis didn't move. His blue eyes were locked onto the display. His fingers gripped the console, but his body remained steady. No, he said. We hold our ground. Clethfar's tail lashed. That is madness. You will be destroyed. Lewis exhaled slowly, then tapped a button. Engineering. Reroute all available power to forward shields. Weapons. Lock onto the enemy vessel. Fire everything we've got. Clethfar could not believe what he was hearing. You are outmatched, he argued. You should not fight a battle you cannot win. Lewis' lips curled into a small smile. That's where you're wrong, Ambassador. He turned, eyes blazing with something fierce and unbreakable. We fight because as long as we're still standing, we can still win. The human way. Clethfar felt something deep inside him shift. He had always thought war was about numbers, strength, and logic. But humans did not fight that way. They fought when they were losing. They fought when they had no chance. And that was why they won. The enemy ship fired. A surge of red-hot energy slammed into the human shields. The ship shook violently, sparks flying as systems overloaded. Clethvar gripped the railing, his golden eyes wide. The Zirak would have retreated by now. Any logical species would have. But the humans? They fought back. A barrage of missiles and plasma fire struck the enemy vessel, tearing through its hull. The opposing ship hesitated, its own defenses weakening. Another direct hit rocked the human ship. The lights flickered. The oxygen systems groaned. And yet, Captain Lewis stood firm. Clethvar felt the weight of that moment. Humans did not fear suffering. Humans did not stop when things became difficult. They kept moving forward, even when everything around them was falling apart. That was not strength in the way the Zirak understood it. It was something more powerful. It was defiance. The turning point. Enemy shields failing. An officer shouted. Lewis nodded, his voice calm despite the chaos. Then let's finish this. A final barrage of human firepower tore through the enemy ship, rupturing its core. The vessel exploded in a bright burst of flame and metal, silenced forever. The bridge of the human ship went still. The alarms faded. The danger was gone. They had won. Clethvar could not comprehend it. This battle should have been impossible to win. And yet, the humans had done it anyway. Because they refused to accept defeat. A new understanding. As the crew cheered, Clethvar turned to Lewis, his voice quiet. You were supposed to lose. Lewis grinned. Yeah, well, we don't do supposed to. Clethvar looked at the human captain for a long moment. And then, for the first time in his life, he understood. Strength was not in armor. Not in numbers. Not in fear. It was in the refusal to break, even when everything said you should. And in that moment, Clethvar knew. Humans were the most dangerous species in the galaxy. Because no matter what happened, they would never stop fighting.